It all started in a way that seemed almost inevitable. Rome was growing, conquering territories, and forming alliances that seemed solid. But in the heart of Italy, up in the mountains, lived a different people, the Samnites. They were tough, strong, and shaped by the rugged terrain they called home. To them, losing their land meant losing their freedom, and that was something they would not accept easily. Tensions rose when the city of Capua, one of the richest in the region, asked for Rome's help. The Samnites were advancing, and Capua, which was not militarily strong, knew it could not resist on its own. Rome found itself in a complicated position because it had made a peace agreement with the Samnites a few years earlier. However, when faced with the choice between keeping their word or expanding their power, Rome chose to act, deciding to protect Capua, knowing full well this meant betraying the Samnites. The first battles were not easy. The Samnites knew every trail of the mountains, every narrow pass, and they used that knowledge to ambush the Roman troops. Imagine the terror of the Roman soldiers marching through a narrow valley, not knowing if they would be attacked at any moment. Despite the challenges, Rome secured a few victories, making it clear that this conflict was far from over. The First Samnite War was just the beginning of something much bigger. After the first battles, it became clear that this war would be unlike any other. The Samnites' greatest advantage was the terrain they knew so well. They were masters at using the mountains to their advantage. The Roman legions, accustomed to fighting on open fields, found themselves trapped in narrow gorges and valleys. In such places, having more soldiers or better weapons meant little. The terrain could decide everything. A clear example of this was the Battle of Mount Garus. Rome, led by consul Marcus Valerius Corvus, had one mission: to defeat the Samnites once and for all. The legions cautiously climbed the mountain, but the Samnites were already waiting, hidden along the slopes, ready to strike at any moment. When the fight began, it was brutal. The Romans struggled to stay organized among the rocks and trees, while the Samnites appeared from all sides like shadows. But Marcus Valerius Corvus did not give up. With great difficulty, Rome achieved a victory, though it was clear that this would be just the first of many challenges. This war was more than just winning battles. It was a war of endurance. The Romans realized that fighting in the mountains would require more than brute force. They would need patience, strategy, and above all the courage to face an enemy who would not surrender easily. In the end, the victory at Mount Garus gave Rome the confidence that, even in unfavorable terrain, they could prevail. But the Samnites were far from disappearing. The war seemed to be going in Rome's favor, until a mistake almost destroyed all the confidence they had built. In 321 BC, the Roman army, made up of thousands of soldiers, fell into one of the most devastating traps in history. It happened at the Caudine Forks, a treacherous gorge between mountains. The legions marched without knowing they were walking into a dead end, a perfect trap set by the Samnites. When they realized what had happened, it was too late. The Samnites, positioned on the heights, blocked the entrance and exit. The Romans were trapped like rats in a cage, with no way to fight or escape. There was no option for battle. Any attempt to attack would be a massacre. So, the Romans were forced to do something they had never done before: surrender. The humiliation didn't end there. To show their dominance, the Samnites forced the Romans to pass under a yoke, essentially an arch made of spears, as a symbol of submission. For Rome, it was like a blow to the heart. An army that had always prided itself on invincibility was now on its knees, and this wound would take a long time to heal. But instead of giving up, this episode ignited an even stronger desire for revenge among the Romans. They could not allow this shame to be the final chapter of the war. The defeat at the Caudine Forks left deep scars. It wasn't just a matter of lost honor. Rome would need time to recover from that wound. But the Romans, known for their resilience, turned that humiliation into motivation. If they had once underestimated the Samnites, now their respect for the enemy was great. They knew that facing the mountain warriors would require much more than strength. It would take intelligence and patience. With this new determination, Rome once again gathered its legions. The bitter experience at the Caudine Forks taught the Romans that they could no longer rely solely on their numbers or quick marches to secure victory. It was necessary to change the way they fought. They began to use more diplomacy, seeking strategic allies who could offer advantages in the rugged terrain of the Samnites. Cities like Naples, for example, allied with Rome, providing not only troops but also valuable knowledge of the region's roots and difficulties. This new approach transformed. The Romans now knew they had to be more cautious and strategic, but they were also more determined than ever. The lessons learned in the Gorge shaped a new Rome, stronger and ready for the next battle. And the next confrontation would come soon, as the Samnites would soon realize that, despite their defeats, Rome had not given up on the war. With a new strategy and a thirst for revenge, Rome was ready to turn the tide. The memory of the humiliation at the Caudine Forks was still fresh, but this time the Roman legions advanced with more caution and wisdom. Rome knew it couldn't fall into the same trap twice. The mistakes of the past had become lessons that shaped the next moves on the battlefield. Rome's new approach began to show results. The alliance with Naples was a decisive step, but Rome understood that defeating the Samnites would require patience. Instead of seeking large open field battles, the Romans focused on smaller victories, launching targeted attacks, taking territories piece by piece, and gradually wearing down the Samnites over time. Every advance, however small, sent a clear message. Rome would not be easily defeated. The Samnites, in turn, felt the pressure mounting. Their ambushes and mountain tactics were still effective, but the Romans were adapting. With each small victory, the morale of the legions grew. The Roman pride. However, everyone knew that a decisive battle was looming, and it would be that battle that would define the future of the conflict. After years of relentless fighting, everything led to a decisive moment. Rome and the Samnites were now facing a battle that had no turning back. It was 295 BC, and the fields of Sentinum were about to become the stage for a massive confrontation. But this time, the Samnites were not alone. They had managed to unite forces with the Gauls and the Etruscans. Other peoples also threatened by Rome's expansion. The tension was palpable. The Roman army knew that this battle could decide the future of the entire Italian peninsula. The legions advanced with a different kind of confidence, but they still felt the weight of responsibility. On one side, Rome's growing military discipline, strengthened with every new battle. On the other, the ferocity of the Samnites and their allies, who knew every inch of the land and fought with the same passion as always. The battle was brutal. Both sides clashed with everything they had. At one point, Publius Decius Mus, one of the Roman consuls, made an unexpected decision. He launched himself into the enemy lines in an act of sacrifice, believing that his death would bring victory to Rome. This moment inspired the legions, who fought as if it were their last battle. And it was this sacrifice that turned the tide. In the end, Rome emerged victorious, and the fate of the Samnites began to be sealed there at Sentinum. Even after their defeat at Sentinum, the Samnites didn't surrender right away. For them, losing a battle didn't mean giving up the war. They continued to resist, fighting with whatever strength they had left. But the reality was that Rome was becoming stronger. The victory at Sentinum not only broke the spirit of many of the Samnites' allies, but also gave Rome an unstoppable momentum. The Samnites, who had long defied Rome's power, were now cornered. Rome, on the other hand, was no longer just fighting to survive. They wanted to eliminate any threat to their expansion, and the Samnites were the last obstacle. Each small Samnite city that fell into Roman hands was another sign that the end was near. The struggle continued for a few more years, but the chances of a Samnite comeback were growing dimmer. The Samnites, who once used the mountains as a shield, now found themselves with no escape. Rome's forces moved with precision, securing one victory after another. It was only a matter of time before the last Samnite stronghold fell, and Rome would finally dominate the entire Italian peninsula. Even as Rome advanced relentlessly, there was still a trace of hope in the hearts of the Samnites. They were a proud people and wouldn't accept defeat easily. As Rome consolidated control over the conquered regions, the Samnites withdrew to more isolated areas in the mountains, trying to maintain a final resistance. But the reality was clear. Rome's power was overwhelming. These last Samnite strongholds faced brutal campaigns. Rome, which had once struggled to fight in the mountains, was now free. The legions, more experienced and better organized, knew how to corner their enemies. One by one, these pockets of resistance fell, and with each victory, Rome reaffirmed its control over central Italy. For the Samnites, there was no turning back. Defeat was inevitable. This final phase of the war wasn't marked by great battles, but by a constant campaign of conquest and occupation. Rome no longer saw the Samnites as a major enemy, but as a people who needed to be subdued to ensure peace. And so, little by little, what remained of Samnite independence was erased, while Rome established itself as the new power of the Italian peninsula. With victory practically assured, Rome began to feel the changes brought by this long war. The Samnite Wars, which had lasted nearly 50 years, left deep marks on both the Roman army and its politics. Roman generals, who had faced the difficulties of the mountainous terrain and the Samnite ambushes, emerged from the war much more experienced. This transformed Rome into an even more efficient military machine. Moreover, the Roman Senate realized that controlling the Italian peninsula would require more than just military victories. Integrating the conquered peoples became a political challenge. The Romans began to apply their famous divide and conquer policy, offering partial citizenship too. This created a network of alliances and dependencies that solidified Rome's power. The war also shaped Rome's character itself. Previously, they fought to survive. Now, they fought to expand their empire. This mentality of conquest became deeply ingrained in Roman society, which began to see war as an inevitable means of securing dominance and stability. The lessons learned from the Samnites would be applied in future conflicts as Rome began to look beyond Italy. With the war practically over, the question remained, what would become of the Samnites? A people who had resisted Roman domination for so long now found themselves completely subjugated. They no longer controlled their lands, and the dream of freedom that had once driven them had been shattered. Rome, as usual, imposed its order. The Samnites lost much of their autonomy and were forced to live under Roman control, now as a conquered people. However, even in defeat, the Samnites did not disappear. They continued to exist, but their political and military influence in the Italian peninsula was completely destroyed. Their mountains, which had once served as natural protection, were now under the watchful eye of the Roman legions. Rome would not allow a threat like that to rise again. For Rome, the victory over the Samnites was symbolic. It represented the triumph over a stubborn and resilient enemy, something the city needed to consolidate its position as the undisputed leader of the Pennines. The message was clear. Anyone who challenged Rome would end up like the Samnites, defeated and forgotten. With the Samnites defeated, Rome felt more powerful than ever. Those years of war not only hardened the army, but also changed the way the Romans saw the world. What had once been merely the survival of a city had now become the expansion of an empire. The victory over the Samnites opened Rome's eyes to what was possible, and they wouldn't stop there. Now every new territory conquered seemed easier. Rome began sending colonists to the lands that had once belonged to the Samnites as a way to ensure that the region would never rebel again. New cities were established, filled with Romans eager to rebuild and transform what had once been enemy territory into allied territory. Italy, which had once been divided by so many peoples and cultures, was now being shaped under one power, Rome. But this expansion was not just military. Rome wanted more than to win battles. They wanted the conquered peoples to adopt their way of life. Over time, what remained of the Samnites and other peoples of the peninsula began to blend in, adapting. Roman laws, the Latin language, and even Roman customs started to spread. And Rome? Well, Rome now looked beyond Italy. The lessons learned in the Samnite mountains would be taken far beyond the peninsula. The Samnite Wars marked a turning point for Rome. What began as a dispute over territory turned into something much larger. Rome emerged from these wars stronger, more determined, and above all, more ambitious. The city, which had once fought only to survive and expand its borders, was now ready to dominate the rest of the peninsula and even look beyond it. This conflict shaped Rome, showing the world that even in the face of tough enemies and difficult terrain, they would not back down. The Samnites, even in defeat, left a mark. They were the ones who forced Rome to become stronger, more cunning. And ironically, by challenging Rome for so long, they ended up helping to create the empire that would change the fate of the ancient world. With the Italian peninsula finally under control, Rome began to look beyond its borders. The lessons learned in the Samnite mountains would now be used against new enemies, bigger and more powerful ones, like Carthage. The Samnite Wars showed the world that Rome would not be easily defeated, and this unyielding spirit would guide the empire for centuries to come. In the end, the Samnites became an important piece in the construction of something much bigger, something they perhaps never imagined, the beginning of the Roman Empire.